Alright guys, now that it's been a month since I last ranked pre-split, and also since I have no exams for the rest of this week, I think that this is the perfect time for me to finally start ranking post-split and give my honest opinion on it. Last time I gave pre-split a 5.6 out of 10, so let's see if my post-split ranking will be better or not. This is the criteria if you forgot in the last video. Starting off with the first episode, it was actually a pretty fine start to post-split. The characters were good for the most part and the plot was enjoyable. But there isn't really anything too dramatic happening here. Also, Taco was annoying here, but really nothing else besides that honestly, so I'll give it a good ranking. This was a very enjoyable episode. The plot was entertaining and everyone was funny for the most part. There were plenty of funny parts in that episode such as Gelatin correcting Bubble, Flower getting rejected falsely, and the whole bridge fight scene was amazing. Also, Taco was at least more likable compared to the previous episode. I mean, she did at least show some care for both Spongy and Woody in that episode. I like this episode an awful lot, so this definitely deserves a high ranking. This episode was mixed with so much stuff that it just makes it odd and inconsistent as a result. Some parts were funny and entertaining, like X's screaming during the elimination and when he was set ablaze. That one post 4 makes in the bottom 2, and him getting angry at the half cost for burning out of airplane, and especially the bringing back of Blocky's Funny Doings International, which is what I liked the most of this episode. Some parts were also unfunny and even useless too, like Taco getting mad at Spongy for not wearing the friendship bracelet when it was Loser that chopped it off. Bubble being an aloe vera nerd, and the context of a virtual cardboard ship surviving over Spongy's metal ship, which is somehow flammable. Also, fun fact, BFB 19 and 20 were supposed to be one episode, but they split it into 2 episodes to make it less longer as a result. Okay, now I can see why a good chunk of you don't like this episode. There's lots of inconsistency. 4 and X were unlikable, especially X in your case because of him screaming a lot in that episode, and plot holes such as the half-cod struggling to breathe in space, and Ruby somehow being in the sun. I feel like the writers were delusional when they made that brief struggling scene, but Ruby being in the sun was probably just a time shift in TPOT 15, maybe serving as accidental foreshadowing. But for my take on the episode, it's bad. I mean, I only liked this episode at first just for how many natural elements they used in this episode, like plants, fire, air, water, you name them. Also, about X's screaming, I sort of found it a bit funny a few times, but also a bit annoying compared to his screaming from the last episode. Overall, I don't hate the episode that much. I mean, it's still bad, but sort of overhated. Definitely an improvement from the last 2 episodes, which this episode in general is good like BFB 17 and 18. The plot was more consistent and the characters were more enjoyable than how they were in the last 2 episodes. My only complaint is that Taco was annoying for like the first half of the episode, but at least she stopped being too much of a Karen in the second half. Oh, and let's not forget about the song Despite Your Popularity that played during the elimination, which was generally a funny song. I don't really care about the Woody bias in this episode. I'm just glad that he is starting to become less of a coward and showing some potential. Overall, I find this episode to be pretty enjoyable in particular. This is my personal favorite post-split episode, mainly because of the resolution of Weepy and Fiery's arc. That scene is hands down the best post-split scene in my opinion. Aside from that, there were also tons of good stuff in this episode, like the rhyme being much better than usual, let alone this being among the most well-written post-split episodes, the characters being very likable, especially Fire and Weepy to be exact, the Despite Your Popularity remix, Taco's elimination, Blocky being Blocky, Woody's prank and some revealing on his character war, and that goofy chanting scene Johnson did at the near end of the episode. Overall, this is my favorite post-split episode, and I don't really have a single complaint about it. I like this episode, and I'll always do. A pretty cool episode if I'm gonna be honest here. Flower and the Half-Cod single-handedly carried this one. The Have-Nots were hardly any better since they were idiots for not thinking of grabbing onto the bottom of the platform where Forrest Cage was. But aside from that, once again, the plot was consistent and the purple face revealing himself from breaking out of the box was golden. Yet alone, I'm still puzzled on why a good chunk of people don't like the character. Well, I'm done blabbering about that. This episode was therefore good, but the previous episode was definitely better. Okay, so to start off, the plot is still at least consistent, and the characters were still good for the most part. I like how this episode continued on with Fire and Weepy's makeup arc, and Woody being the new Blocky sure did give me a laugh. Also, this is the point in the series where Lollipop gets some actual character development and becomes nicer and helpful around others. But what I didn't like is that the episode can be a little fillery at some certain moments, especially at the beginning, and 4 was kinda harsh in that episode. But overall, this episode is still passable. Well, for this being the shortest episode of post-split, compared to BFB 9, the shortest and worst episode of pre-split, this episode was actually pretty alright. I thought I hated just for being too short, for the lack of war for the temple, and not flower bias at the end, but I actually did have a relatively fine time watching this episode. I mean, the flower bias was reasonable, considering that Flower was somehow a pea brain and stayed in the temple just to find a blessed totem, when she could have gone wrong that whole time, and 4 and the others would have lost their patience at this point. Also, the Flower dancing montage was amazingly fire, and the overall pacing of this episode was generally lighthearted like those short and simple Season 1 episodes. So while this episode does indeed get a pass, I still feel like it would have gotten a ranking above 6 if the episode was longer and more of the temple was shown. I honestly think that this was just a waste of a new location found in the series. Alright, so to start off on this whole Profile being a contestant all along thing, while it's very creative and funny for the most part, it's also a little annoying and stupid. And for Profile's first appearance in the series, they were an annoyance for the most part, but were admittingly funny at times. Now I can see that Force's anger and annoyance in this episode is justified, and I can definitely roll with him here. The second half of the episode, which is the challenge part, was definitely better and less annoying. Like, the characters were still likable for the most part, especially Weepy and Lollipop. I mean, Lollipop's character development for BFB 24 did continue onwards, and BFB 26 is a good example of that. So overall, this episode started off just dandy, then annoying, and good again. It's passable for the most part, but if Profile wasn't such an annoying douche, again, it's their first appearance, this episode would have been ranked higher, not gonna lie. Starting off, I liked the plot, the challenge was interesting, the mall song was fire, and the characters such as Gelatin, Flower, and especially Cheetah were great here. Now with my complaints for the episode, 4 was harsh and whiny again like how he was in BB 24, but a bit worse. Also, I can understand that 4 just wants to try his best to be a good host. And for Weepy, while she wasn't all that bad in the first half, as someone whose favorite character is Weepy, I gotta admit that she was sorta unlikable in the second half, where she, like 4, became whiny over nice. Overall, this episode wasn't too bad for the most part. It has its flaws, but still passable. There are so many things that I like about this episode. Announcer's return, the conflict between 4 and announcer, 4's anger actually being funny this time compared to the previous episode, announcer's kick at steak wrap, the BRBers finally make an appearance after so long, the scene at the dairy end with X lamenting over 4's loss accompanied with the piano music, and especially the challenge, which was classical and fun to watch everyone compete for the final immunity. I have no complaints with this episode whatsoever. Another peak episode right off the bat, though the only reason why this is a 9.9 instead of a full 10 is because not only BFB 22, my favorite episode, is already a full 10, but also because Taco slightly ruined that one, but I don't really care whatsoever anyways. This was a creative episode. Like certain episodes such as TPOT 11 and BFJ 13, this one isn't challenge focused and has a unique plot where everyone tries to save the show. Everyone was good for the most part, and there were some charming and funny moments here and there, such as the epic elimination wire scene, Blocky and Woody's interactions in that episode, Fiery demanding for the prize, Purple Face carrying a good chunk of the episode, the budget transition at the year end, and especially some more on the announcer during all this time. Those subplots with Taco and the announcer were also considered good, but Taco was still being her usual post-split Karen self, but at least she had a good reason this time. Sure, I know that there's some flower bias at the end, as the writers made the characters persuade Flower to insert her money into the budget as an act of character development, but to be fair, it was the character's idea to do so in the first place, not Flower's. It's an act of sacrifice as to what Pencil would say. Although it's still a creative episode nonetheless, I have definitely seen better episodes than this. Now for the Dairy Last Post-split episode. The first 13 minutes went pretty well, and afterwards the episode splits into 2 plots, with one group going after 4 and the other going after the BFDI. The plot involving 4 was relatively great, while the plot involving the BFDI was somewhat childish, and not technically in the best way. Like, some of the characters wanted to help Flower retrieve her prize after Purple snatched it, yet they want to snatch it themselves. Like, I know how affectionate the BFDI is, but that's just hypocrisy, man. But in truth, though, I really like how the characters played out here. I honestly don't even care about the Flower bias anymore, and I don't consider her character development to be pointless because characters like Flower need to have variety in their personalities once in a while. I also really like how the characters show to care for each other throughout, and the scene where Jonathan stands up to Thor was very well played, which is the point in the episode where Thor understands that despite his aggression, his contestants truly care for him and are willing to support him no matter what. The amount of character development in this episode, whether biased or not, is overall well played and feels like the quality of a typical Teapot episode. I am, however, not a fan of the Stainers since it was just a 1 minute filler scene over the word hey. But aside from that, and the BFDI plot being childish, this was still overall a good episode with a good plot, charming and funny moments, and drastic character development. And I really have to give it to the episode for its weight, since everything in this episode proves that this finale is indeed a worthy watch. So to conclude, I thought Post-Split would be just as decent as Pre-Split, but after rewatching the entirety of Post-Split within 24 hours, I never realized how drastically good Post-Split is, especially when compared to Pre-Split. I found the episodes here to be more consistent and enjoyable since the cast was smaller and easier to work with. The episodes got better structure than in Pre-Split and had better plots and character development throughout. I honestly do not care about the writing flaws, inconsistent animation style, and character bias other people talk about because it's my opinion and I have the right to like Post-Split if I want to. We look at things differently, and my opinion on Post-Split appears to be a drastic example. This actually served as a good opportunity for various people to contribute to the show that changed their lives. Trust me. In spite of everyone's complaints, I'm definitely admitting that everyone that worked on Post-Split really tried their best to put the best effort they can for the show. So good job to all of you that worked on Post-Split. You all did your best, even with some slips here and there. So overall, Post-Split gets an 8 out of 10. It's an awesome season and better than I thought. And while some parts of the season can be bothersome at times, it's still a great season overall, with more consistent structure and better character management compared to Pre-Split. So that's about it. I'm all done ranking the entirety of BFB. Next year, I might rank every Teapot episode, so stay tuned for that.